Greetings one and all. Super Thursdays here in the Holy Apple. We are in the month of Sivan, Holy Land, Holy Apple, and Holy Hilltop, Tal Binyamin. Today's crucial class, Wake Up Call, Meron, a must-heard message. Let's get a few things straight. This terrible tragedy, it was the #1 civilian tragedy in the land of Israel ever. Previous one, unfortunately, was 11 years ago on Hanukkah, when the Carmel forest was torched, and we lost 44 Jews. Unfortunately, we passed the record 2 weeks ago today in Meron. 45 holy Jews died. And the 45, they all have names, they all have families, friends, schools. You see the goodness looking at pictures of them. You see the spirituality, you see the light. They were great rabbis, scholars, young yeshiva students, children. And we will discuss some lessons, this wake-up call for all of us. Now, let's make it clear here. We are going to discuss some of our flaws. This does not mean in any shape or form that these flaws are connected to the 45 that perished. Not whatsoever. So that's important to remember. Don't think that the flaws that we're talking about are the ones that these 45 had. Not so at all. The Khatam Sofer writes that we mistakenly believe that in order for a person to reach whatever goal that God had sent for them in this world, a person has to live a long time. 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years. Not so, says the Khatam Sofer. Khatam Sofer says that for a person to reach their potential, to reach their goal of what they were brought to the world for, does not need to take a long time at all. It can be very short. However, so many times we mess up by our sins, by our characteristic traits, bad deeds, whether it's between us and God or between us and fellow man. And therefore, just like a monopoly, you don't pass go and you don't collect 200. So we have to start from the beginning, play it again. Now, one might ask, Yehudah, according to that logic, how come we see a lot of righteous people that live till 90, 100? There have been great rabbis in our times that have lived to 102, Rabbi Vosner of Bnei Brak, and others, 102, 101. Chatam Sofer also deals with that question. It has nothing to do with the Chatam Sofer's first statement, which means, God forbid to think that these tremendously righteous people that we see who live a long life, that's because they have not reached their potential or their goal. There are other reasons why they are here for such a long time, and he goes into them. That's not our discussion today. So remember that. These people that left, these young people, these children, the Chatam Sofer tells us that you don't have to be an old person to reach your goal and achievements and the purpose that you were brought to this world. You don't need a long time. And next, of course, the prophet Isaiah tells us in Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. God tells us, of course, that his thoughts, so to speak, his ways are way above us, like the difference between earth and heaven. That's big time. If we were able to understand, everything, then we would be God. So that's impossible. So there is only a minimal amount that we understand. An average person uses 5% of their brain. What happens to the other 95%? We're limited. We have glasses, our vision, limited. Our hearing, limited. Also, understanding. Today, we have no prophets to tell us why this happened, or what we have to do, what we have to correct, what we have to mend. We do not. However, with all the above said, and may this wake-up call be an elevation for the 45 souls that perished. May the words of Torah, may our changes, even slight changes, may it be a tremendous consolation and strength for the family members, for the friends that are left with a broken heart. May our changes give them strength to move on, to continue. With all said above, we remember the words of Maimonides. Maimonides tells us in the Laws of Fasting, chapter 1, laws 1, 2, and 3. When tragedy falls upon a community, we must know that this is a result of our bad deeds. This shall be a catalyst that such events will not return. Black and white, Maimonides. If, however, we proclaim that this events that occurred by chance, this cruel thinking just happened, will lead to more tragedies due to the fact that we continue to stick in our old ways, habits, traits. When we see a tragedy, personal, when we see things going wrong, we have to call a timeout. How much more so? 45, the greatest civilian tragedy in the history of Israel. And religious Jews. We better call a timeout. We better have a wake-up call here. The Holy Baal Shem Tov tells us an amazing psychological concept. very fundamental. If you see something negative during the day, during the week, the month, your life, know that this is a wake-up call for us. This is a mirror image. We are looking in the mirror at ourselves. God brought a person, and this person did A, B, C, D. It's really a wake-up call for me. It means that what I've seen before my eyes is not only that person's problem, but it's my problem. Now, let's not get things wrong here. When the Holy Baal Shem Tov said these words, that any incident that happens to us is really a mirror image of ourselves, of a blemish within us, this is true. However, let's not make this mistake. We might have seen a person with a blemish who has a blemish 100%. And within us, it's maybe 0.5%, but still exists. So don't start beating our chest to think that, oh my God, I just saw I saw somebody doing something terrible in front of my eyes. That means like I'm the same creep as this person? No, it doesn't mean that at all. Not at all. But it does mean that there is a certain minuscule point that perhaps is similar that I have to correct. And that is why God had me meet up with this terrible person phenomena. So remember that. It's just a lesson for us many times to fine-tune our habits, our traits, our deeds, our thinking. Okay, wake-up call number 1. It says in the Talmud, in Tractate Shabbat 60a and 60b, there's a dispute among the sages when exactly this event that I will tell you about took place. Some say during the time of Hanukkah, some say during the time of the Roman Empire, some say it was in different period. It was at a different period when there were religious decrees against the Jewish people. But it's really irrelevant to us. At a difficult time in Jewish history, Jews, it was on a Shabbat, and Jews were hiding out because they were not allowed to keep the Sabbath. If one kept the Sabbath, they were taking their life in their hands. It was a danger. So a very big group of Jews hid out in various caves. And then they heard noise, and they were sure that the Gentiles had revealed that Jews were hiding in this cave, and they wanted to escape, at least to have a shot of staying alive and not just having the enemies come into a closed zone of a cave with no escape possible. So the Jews at this time, maybe this was the style, the fashion, they had sandals, and at the bottom of the sole of the sandal were little nails. And the Jews became frightened and began to stampede, to run outside of the cave. And it says that there were more Jews killed by these dangerous sandals, the sandals with the nails in the sole, than from the enemy outside the cave. So, our sages came by and they decreed, they declared that there was now a new Jewish law. That at times where there are big gatherings of Jews, festivals, or on the Shabbat, that one is not allowed to wear these sandals or even to carry these sandals, in order to make sure that such a tragedy would not reoccur. In fact, Maimonides even brings down this in his code of Jewish law, in the laws of Shabbat. Another case. In the days of Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel. This was in Europe before Rabbi Kook arrived here. So this is the late 1800s. In a synagogue in Europe, in a city called, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Bezaimalis. It was time to take the Torah scroll out of the ark, and the Torah fell down on the floor. You can imagine the reaction of the congregation at the time. Now, within Jewish law, there's a dispute, such a scenario where a Torah scroll has fallen, and somebody was an eyewitness to this. Do they have to fast? How long? Some say a day, some say 40 days. Others say you just have to give charity. There's a different opinions. What happens when a sacred Torah scroll falls to the ground? The first declaration made by Rabbi Avraham Kook, you know what it was? Amazing. What did he say? He stated that we must immediately build a new, big, strong ark. You can imagine people are, they're bracing themselves for something spiritual, something mystical. Why did it happen to us? What do we have to fix? And Rabbi Kook hits it out of the stadium. And he says the first things that he says. He looks at and he says the reason why this happened, that the Torah scroll fell, was because of the fact that the ark is this tiny and not stable ark. So we have to first fix this physical problem. And Rabbi Kook went on to further say, as he explained to the congregation, when there is a stumbling block that is present in a community, the main repentance is first to remove it. This is more important than fasting. We discussed a day, charity, 40 days. This is much more important. If there's a stumbling block, if there's something dangerous, a possible danger, first take care of this physical stumbling block. You have to make sure that everyone is safe. That's number one. Afterwards, we'll worry about spiritual ideas. Why did this happen to us? So, folks, we have a 1-2 punch. We have our sages in the time of the Talmud that forbid the Jews to carry let alone wear these types of sandals on the Sabbath or on festivals, because one time the Jews came to a danger. Not only a danger, they were killed. More were killed by these sandals than the enemy of the Jewish people. By the way, this case that I mentioned could be found in the Igrot HaRiyah, first volume, 10th letter. Folks, those of us that have been to Meron, and I hope most of us have been there, done that, we must realize, besides for the miracles that also took place this year, many of you may have been privileged to hear about many, many miracles that happened. Could have been a lot worse. But the only time on record that we have where a tragedy happened in Meron, in the tomb of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, was in 1911. 110 years ago, there was some kind of bleacher or stairway that fell, and 11 Jews were killed in 1911. But besides for that, all of us that have been in Meron, we know how many miracles there must have been all these years for the grace of God. Thank you. All the miracles that nothing like this ever happened. I mean, I've been there with my kids, and I know, and I've been there, done that I get to a certain place, and I call a timeout, and I tell my kids, we are not going any further. Because I could sense, my inner siren goes off. And I can tell that we cannot go any further. It is a danger to go any further, and we sit on the side, and from that angle, that's fine for us. It's good enough for us. So we thank God for all the miracles of all these years, that such a thing for the last 110 years, nothing has happened. Amazing miracles. I mean, we're talking about a place that 500,000 people. And think about it, this year there were even less than usual. So definitely this is a wake-up call. But our number one wake-up call is safety. What is going on here? Who is responsible? Who is responsible for this tragedy? For the fact that I'm not going to get into all the articles that I've read about this and various engineers that have talked about it, blaming the police. I'm going to try to stay away from a lot of information that I've read. But whoever they are, whether they are religious, because there's no immunity because you're religious. No immunity. Actually, the opposite. You're held more responsible if you are religious. So who's responsible here? Something is very, very wrong here. So that's wake-up call number one. And in the words of Rav Kook, this wake-up call is more important than the fasting. This should be our number one priority. Speaking of priorities, that's our next category called priorities. Making Meron our number one priority and Jerusalem coming in a second. The biggest event of the year in the land of Israel is the event of Lag BaOmer in Meron at the tomb of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That is the biggest single event of the year. It was in the early 1800s, 1834, a gigantic earthquake hit the northern part of Israel. Safed, Tiberias. 3 years later, in 1837, a devastating earthquake hit the northern parts of Israel, including Shechem, what the Gentiles called Nablus, where I happen to live, Tiberias, Beit Shan, Safed. Safed was totally destroyed, devastated. Thousands of people died in this earthquake, 1837. The Khatam Sofer, in his question and answer, QA, 233 and 234, tells us amazing information here. Once again, when I'm about to read you, I would personally never say, because who am I? But this is the Khatam Sofer, so we'll let him talk. I summarize. The earthquake in 1837 hit, it was January 1st, 1837, 24th day of the Jewish month of Tevet. And the Khatam Sofer eulogized thousands of Jews that were killed in this devastating earthquake. And he tells us the following. He tells us that 30 communities were destroyed in the vicinity, in the northern part of Israel. 30 communities. Scholars, righteous people were destroyed. And then he quotes Shochar Tov 104:32 on Psalms. Elijah the prophet explains, earthquakes come to the world when God sees the Gentiles living in tranquility and Jerusalem and the temple in destruction. Once again, when God sees, according to Elijah the prophet, bringing down a prophecy here, that when God sees the Gentiles living in tranquility and the city of Jerusalem and the temple in ruins, this brings upon God's wrath, translated into an earthquake. Khatam Sofer continues, in the Torah, we have seen only once when the earth quaked and opened up its mouth to swallow. When was that? One time in the Torah, where there was an earthquake and it swallowed Korach and his followers. And what was behind Korach and his followers? There was a dispute. There was a dispute going on. And when there's a dispute going on, the Torah tells us even minors below the age of 20 are killed. Usually there is no din shamayim. There is no heavenly decrees against people below the age of 20. But if there's disputing, if there's fighting going on amongst the Jewish people, that changes the rules. Rabbi Israel of Shklov, he was born 180 years ago in Eastern Europe. Also, the Khatam Sofer was born the same time and also resided in Eastern Europe. However, later on in life, Rabbi Israel of Shklov, he moved to the land of Israel. One of his famous works, he authored a book on the laws of the land of Israel called Pe'at Shulchan. And the Khatam Sofer tells us about a letter he received from Rabbi Israel of Jerusalem, no longer of Shklov, but of Israel. And he sent two explanations for the tragedy of the Jewish community of Safed. Number one, the Talmud tells us in the tractate of Sota, on page 49, that a sign of the coming of the Messiah is when the Galilee will be devastated, will be destroyed. So the first sign that Rabbi Israel of Jerusalem sent in a letter, in a telegram to Khatam Sofer in Eastern Europe was that, God willing, this should be a sign of the coming of Messiah. We did not merit this, but let us hope that now, after close to 200 years, 1837, close to 200 years, now, today, we're ready. Second lesson, written to the Khatam Sofer by Rabbi Yisrael. There, listen closely. This is amazing. I want to tell you something personal here. I have known about this Khatam Sofer. I've heard it a couple of times, but I never really looked at the words, looked at it. I've read about it, but for me, the words that I'm about to read to you, I've never heard them said. It's amazing. There are tremendous inner fighting that's going on amongst us. Needless hatred. Constant bickering between Hasidim, Perushim, and Sfaradim. Different types of religious Jews. This is the meaning what the Talmud tells us on the same page where it talks about signs of the coming of the Messiah. One of them, that the Galil will be destroyed. It says there in the same lines that study halls of Torah will turn and become places of prostitution. And Rabbi Israel of Shklov of Jerusalem understands this to mean when Jews begin baseless, needless hatred, bickering, fighting amongst us, not respecting one another. This is the meaning that study halls of Torah will turn into places of prostitution. Because there's a lot of bickering. Who's going to get the job in these prostitution houses? So there's always fighting. Oh, I want the job. I want the money. I need it. Pulling each other's hair out. Amazing. Folks, this was the letter. Amazing letter. Why such a tragedy happened in 1837 in the earthquake in Sfat, in Safed. But the Khatam Sofer himself, in other places, and I will bring them down. Michtevei Khatam Sofer, the letters of Khatam Sofer, 62nd letter, or questions and answers of the Khatam Sofer. Even Haezer, first volume, 132, paragraph 132, or question and answers of the Khatam Sofer on Choshen Mishpat, the laws of justice on the 12th paragraph. Talks about tremendous hatred. The Chatam Sofer talks about the tremendous hatred of the Ashkenazim by the Sfaradim. Amazing. The opposite of what we see sometimes today, more of the Ashkenazim on the Sfaradim. In the times of the Chatam Sofer, it was the opposite. And the Chatam Sofer goes on. We have forgotten Jerusalem, and we mostly turn to Safed, to Meron, since the Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and the Arizal are buried there. People choose to go to the celebration of Rashbi rather than Jerusalem. Folks, open up our hearts. Listen to what the Chatam Sofer is saying, that there was a devastation of the religious community in Safed. In 1837, thousands died. Torah scholars, giants, religious people. Why? Because of needless hatred, bickering, fighting, inner fighting, lack of respect for one another. And this is what brought our downfall. When the Chatam Sofer says that we choose Meron, we choose Safed over Jerusalem, besides being an historical fact, it was true. However, to add to this topic, there are Jewish law experts, rabbis, that came out over the years against this massive going up to Meron. We will name a few of them. First one, of course, was the Chatam Sofer himself, who in Yehudah 233 and 234 explains that he would not participate in such a thing. He himself would not participate in such a thing, though people have good intentions, he writes. For sure they have good intentions, and I'm sure they will be, for their good intentions, they will be rewarded. But still, there is something off here. Priorities. The Pri Chadash in Orach Chaim 496, paragraph 14. In the 13th volume of Chikrei Lev, written by Rabbi Yosef Chazan, who passed away 200 years ago. In the last volume, 13, in Yehudah 11, speaks negatively about this new phenomena, relatively speaking, of going up to Meron on Lag BaOmer. The Pitrei Tshuva, if you open up your Code of Jewish Law, Shulchan Aruch, you'll see it in Yehudah 251, chapter, Law number 4. Question and answers by Rabbi Yosef Shaul Nathanson, who passed away 145 years ago. In the 5th volume, 39th question, comes out against this prioritizing of Meron. Moving forward in our times, over the past 2 weeks, Rabbi Dov Lior, chief rabbi of Kiryat Arba, Rosh Yeshiva of Kiryat Arba, a tremendous Torah scholar. Many books, question and answers in Jewish law. Says the following, when he was interviewed by Arutz Sheva. There's a place in Judaism for people to gather at grave sites of the righteous, but not at the expense of the desecration of God's name that takes place every day in Jerusalem by Arab terrorists on the Temple Mount. These impure Muslims trampling on the Temple Mount, playing soccer, picnics. 2, why aren't we making an effort to pressure the government to allow Jews to pray on the temple in areas which are okay by all Jewish law opinions? Why not build a synagogue on the southern part of the Temple Mount, a place for Jews to pray on the Temple Mount, which is agreed upon by the Jewish law authorities? In the times now, Rabbi Lior finishes, in the time of King David, the tabernacle traveled from tent to tent, from place to place, instead of a permanent dwelling. If the people would have demanded, during the time of King David, if people would have demanded the building of the temple, instead the poor temple, it's traveling from place to place. It's in a tent. It's in a temporary abode. Embarrassment. Do we live in tents, in huts? King David would have been able to build the temple. People then were indifferent and apathetic. And so too today. God is upset with us for the lack of excitement and demand for the removal of the Arabs from Temple Mount and establishment of a synagogue on the Temple Mount. And next, my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Israel Ariel, the head of the Temple Institute, has brought into the world a revolution, making the temple, making the vessels of the temple, making it real. There are city plans, there are city planners that have the whole planning of how to bring people, we're talking about today, modern day, how to bring them to the temple, how it's going to work, facilities, bathrooms, how it's going to be. We have them ready. We have the programs ready. So Rabbi Ariel, he quotes, believe it or not, he quotes the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is not happy with what's happening on Lag BaOmer. Why? Because the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says himself in Mechilta 23:25, worshiping God takes place in Jerusalem. If we want to worship God, that takes place in Jerusalem. Or another quote from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, this one is in Mechilta de Rashbi, in Exodus 29, 20-9. The divine presence does not dwell amongst Israel until the tabernacle or the temple was completed. The divine presence does not dwell amongst us. We're without this divine protection. Rabbi Ariel concludes, it is no wonder when we exchange going up to Meron instead of going up to the temple, tragedy strikes home. When we prioritize Meron over Jerusalem, when we exchange a law, which is Jerusalem, a obligation for a custom, Meron, tragedy falls. Amazing. And we spoke a few minutes ago, dear friends, about a handful of tremendous Torah giants who came out against this custom. And to understand this, we don't have to go too far back. If we open up the Yalkut Shimoni, 874, we see there that King David was punished. Why? Because King David had not conquered the area of Jerusalem. The Jebusites had resided in Jerusalem. And King David did not do anything about that. He did not conquer that area of Jerusalem, of the Temple Mount. Instead, he went up north. He went to Syria, but today would be considered Syria, and he conquered those areas. God says, King David, what's going on over here? The palace of God you have not conquered, and you're going hundreds of kilometers to Syria, to northern Syria to conquer? First, prioritize yourself, your own backyard, Jerusalem, the temple, God's palace. King David is punished. Priorities. There is a concept in Judaism. It's called concept is the following: that when God sees the nations of the world doing something positive, and then God looks at the Jewish people to see in the same note, the same angle or issue, how are the Jews addressing their angle of the question? If the Jews are doing fine in their own issues, then that's fine, nothing happens. There's no boomerang against the Jewish people. However, if God looks at the Gentiles and see that they're doing for their beliefs, they're sacrificing themselves, they're going the extra mile, and he looks at the Jews for our important issues, we are not willing to sacrifice or go the extra yard, then a boomerang, a prosecution, so to speak, occurs against the Jewish people. God looks at both parties. So listen to this. Think about this one. The past, less than a week ago, in Jerusalem, on Friday, 90,000 Arabs from all over Israel, also from the world, marched up to Al-Aqsa. 90,000 people. It was important for them to make the pilgrimage. A few days before, 70,000 making the pilgrimage to the Temple Mount. Many Arab buses were turned back, but that did not stop the Arabs. Many of them walked 30 kilometers from Latrun intersection. That's 19 miles. They did not give up. They did not concede. They kept on fighting and sacrificing for their Al-Quds, for their Al-Aqsa, for their contamination, for their comics, for their lie. How about us? Where do we stand? Talking to myself first. Where do we stand? when it comes to dedication, sacrifice for Jerusalem, for the Temple Mount, studying the laws of the Temple Mount, studying the laws of the sacrifices. It's coming soon. Next, this is all caused, this prioritizing different places like Meron over Jerusalem has caused a boomerang against the Jewish people. Wake-up call number 3. Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, very interesting person. He was born in India and he made his way to England, speaks English fluently, speaks Hebrew fluently, probably knows Yiddish also. It's an interesting combination of a Kabbalist and also a Litvak. Very interesting combination. He hits a grand slam. He really hits a grand slam. He tells us the following. During the counting of the Omer, of course, this tragedy of the 45 Jews that perished happened during the counting of the Omer on the 33rd day. 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died for not showing respect or enough respect for one another. However, Rabbi Hillel brings down that the Arizal writes something else. Not that they lacked respect, rather they hated and belittled each other. Hated and belittled each other. 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. In the tractate Yevamot 62b, it asks the question, how did these 24,000 students die? The answer it gives, it was a terrible death. So the Gemara is not sufficient for the Talmud, a terrible death. There are many terrible deaths, or we might say death is terrible no matter what kind of death it is. But what does that mean? So the Talmud says, you know what, I'm going to tell you, it's it's like number one on the list, and that is called Askera. Askera. According to the majority of Rishonim, of the early commentators, Askera is choking, suffocating. This could be found in Rashi, in Tractate Ktubot, page 30, side B. This could also be, look under the word Askera, Aleph Samech, Kaf Reish Hey. Look in the Aruch, and he brings down this and many others. And Rabbi Yaakov Hillel continues, during the same period of time, when the students of Rabbi Akiva who did not respect one another, or who belittled or hated one another, they stopped dying on the 33rd day of the Omer. And what happened this year in Israel? We continued dying. 45 precious souls. How did they die? Amazing. Rabbi Hillel says they suffocated, just like the death of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. They suffocated. They yelled, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And Rabbi Yaakov goes on, but we don't need him for this, because those that are on the inside know without Rabbi Hillel. There's too much needless hatred amongst religious Jews. We're not talking about secular Jews right now. Talking about amongst us. Hasidim against the Litvaks. Breslov against others. The national religious against... There's the Sfaradim against the Ashkenazim. There's the Ashkenazim and the Yemenites. People are not allowed in learning institutions, boys, girls. because of the fact that they are Sephardic? How many people are not willing to marry somebody that's Hasidic, that wears a knitted kippah, skull cap? How many places, how many religious places will they not allow somebody with a knitted kippah who could be a greater scholar than them a millionfold over? But because they wear the knitted kippah, they are not allowed to lead the prayers. They are not allowed, they are not given an aliyah to go up and say a blessing on the Torah. Posters of this group, one group tearing down posters of another, hatred between groups, money, political sometimes issues between groups. And it's all happening. And he brings down also that he said the same words a year plus ago with the corona, which is also suffocating. Because he was talking about this problem that continues. It says an amazing thing. Listen closely. In Mishlei, chapter 1, look it up in Yalkut Shimoni on Mishlei, chapter 1. It says there that in every generation, until we fix this needless hatred, in every generation we have a repeat, a return of the 10 rabbis, that 10 martyrs during the time of the Romans, during the various reigns of the Roman Empire. It didn't happen at one time, but at various times during their reign, there were 10 tremendous, top of the top, the greatest scholars of all, including Rabbi Akiva, were murdered by the Romans. And in every generation, this is amazing, in every generation, this reoccurs. And folks, if you think, well, 10 doesn't match up with 45, you didn't catch it at all. Because we're talking about those 10. Imagine you have like the top 10 basketball or baseball stars. Now they are equal to 100 other players. So in our terminology, these 10 great, the greatest, today in our times it could be hundreds of people. Could be hundreds. I don't even want to go further than that. That's an amazing thing. By the way, I just saw that this morning when I was learning before the morning prayers. Nothing just happens, but I ran into this. Amazing. And folks, also this morning, I was like shocked. I just had to stand up and walk it off because I was so shocked. The area of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, where he's buried, his tomb, it's divided up into 4 religious institutions are responsible. So it's divided up. Different areas of the tomb are under the auspices of a different religious group. Now, this tragedy, when 45 people died, this happened in the section which is under the auspices of the Toldot Aaron, which is a Hasidic community. And all of a sudden this morning, it finally hit me. This is an amazing. What of all communities, Toldot Aaron, Aaron stood for a love. Aaron was never jealous of his brother. They were both tremendous giants. And even though they were giants, they never got in each other's hair. They were happy for the success of one another. And even though they were different, Moses representing strict judgment and Aaron representing kindness and love, it didn't matter. They still loved each other. They still loved each other. And it just hit me that this happened, this tragedy. It happened in the section of Toldot Aaron. Can anything be clearer than this? That God is telling us because we are not going in the ways of Aaron. And once again, remember our base. Remember our foundation at the beginning. Go back and listen. It doesn't mean that those of us listening, we have a gigantic hatred for other Jews. No. But it could be, and it is, that within love of Jews, we might not hate anybody, hate other Jews. We love Jews. But our love is lacking. And because it's lacking, it's the same coin, just the other opposite side. It's the opposite side. There's a hatred, there's bickering, there's fighting, there's disputes, and then there's a lack of love for one another, a lack of sacrificing for one another. So don't think that it means that we're terrible people. It definitely means that all of us have, in this, between fellow men, we have something to correct here. In Breshit Rabbah 38:6, Rebbe tells us that even if the Jews were to worship, God forbid, idols, but there was peace amongst themselves, it's as if God cannot touch them. Amazing. Worshipping idols, number one cardinal sin in Judaism. You got to give your life for it. If there's peace amongst the Jewish people, as if, God says, it's as if I cannot judge you, I cannot touch you, I cannot punish you. However, if there is a lack of love amongst the Jewish people, then all bets off. Bad news for the Jews. We don't have to be the same. We could be different. But there are so many things. Rabbi Kahana, my rabbi, he would always say, we have so much more in common with the Satmar Hasidim than we do with the Jewish secular nationalists. Satmar! An amazing, one of the giants of America Jewry, Rabbi Jacob Kamenetsky. Amazing. He has a commentary on the Torah. It's called Emet LiYaakov. And on this week's portion, what we will read in 2 days from now, he writes the following. I summarize. When the Jews left Egypt, they did not run for their lives in every possible direction. Rather, the Torah tells us they left like an army, organized. Ever been in an army base? There's flags. Every unit has its color, its flags, its symbols. Then, why were the Jewish people not issued flags when we left Egypt? It says that we left Egypt in an orderly fashion. So why, only in this week's portion, after the tabernacle has been erected, only now it's telling us in the first verses of Numbers, the book of Numbers, number one, it's telling us about the flags. Why is that? It tells an amazing idea. We would think that the flags would be issued to the tribes then. On the surface, Rabbi Kamenetsky says This is prophetic. This is really, if you understand this, you got it all. If you don't understand, you don't understand anything. He really is prophetic in my eyes, this Rabbi Kamenetsky piece. He says the following: on the surface, flags are a dividing, are a division, are a separating mechanism. Everyone has their flag. You know, you go to a stadium, people have the Buccaneer flag, people have the Bears flag, people have the Rams flag. Everyone has a different, and no one can stand each other. Flags mean division. In the army, different units. Everyone has their own color. Not only an icon, an emblem, a symbol, but also their own color. And when it came to the breastplate of the priest, the high priest, everyone else had a separate type of stone, a different stone. It doesn't seem very unifying. However, when we look deeper into the subject of flags, we see this is not a dividing and separating mechanism whatsoever. Just like a person has eyes, ears, a mouth, they're very, very different functions. No one's killing each other. No one's eating each other up. No one's bickering. No one's fighting. Why? Because we're one. We're one body. Eyes have a purpose. They have their purpose. My ears, my arms, my legs, everyone, we're working together. We are different, yes, but we work together for the same goal. So therefore, this amazing piece by Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, therefore only after receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai, only after receiving the tabernacle, the commandment to build a tabernacle, the tabernacle built already, then we can give out the flags and the colors and the different emblems and the icons. Why? Because now we are different, and every tribe has its special characteristic traits. Everyone different from the other. That is true. But if we have a unifying magnet, the Torah, if we have a unifying magnet called the tabernacle or the temple, then everything is cool, everything is fine. You do your job. You know, you make a movie. You have a sports team. You need 1,000,001 people working together. Everyone has different jobs. People might not understand the other person. It might be totally contradicting, but it all gels together. And they all have respect for one another. That is what we need. So we are different. And there's a reason. And we must learn from each group. Rabbi Kahana, he went with a skull cap, which was a mixture of black, representing the community that wear the black, but it was also knitted, representing the national religious community, to make a mix of it all. That is what we need. And we all need to give a hand. Up until this corona, me and my wife and my family, we merited to have every week, we would have boys over from the largest yeshiva in the world, the Mir Yeshiva. Every week we would have boys come over, and we would take them on a hike and set up meals for them and talk to them and bring us closer to see how much we have in common. This was amazing. Unfortunately, the virus came and of course people stopped coming. But every one of us, it's time to stop. It's time to stop and realize how much we have in common. And it's true, there are differences. There are differences. But every group has its point. Every group we could learn from. And there can be disputes and disagreements. But what it's come to, those that know, those that are inside, we know what it's come to, and it's out of control. It must be stopped. Wake-up call number 4. This one was written by Rabbi Amichai Gordon, called Shoving Culture. Now I saw this in a what we would call a black hat magazine. What's the headline? The headline is a rabbi from the National Religious Camp says there is a shoving culture amongst the religious. Who gives a damn what camp he's from? If he's telling the truth, then what does it matter? What is this detail you are giving us here? This is needless hatred. Who gives that he has a knitted? Who gives what kind of skull cap he has? Who cares if he's from the National Religious Camp? It's irrelevant. It's once again just stupid hatred, needless hatred. He says unfortunately amongst the religious, there is a shoving culture. Now, a few people commented that first of all, many agreed that there is a shoving culture, but they said, listen, there's a shoving culture amongst the non-religious. I would say go further. There is a shoving culture in Israel. It's unfortunate. We could explain and try to understand it more. People who are nervous, they're under fire, they don't know if they're going to make it home. Okay, people are much more nervous here because you don't know what's going to bring the next second here in this country. You're not under fire. It's hard to understand. Okay, we could talk about it, but it's really irrelevant. Yes, there is a shoving culture in Israel. You could be online in the bank and you're, let's say, fourth in line, and you're looking at something, and a minute later or 2 minutes later, you're last in line. How did that happen? Well, it's called the shoving culture. So yes, it is a problem in all of Israel. True. However, I'm not interested right now in all of Israel. I'm talking about us, the religious community, where God expects much more for us. As it says that derech eretz, being a human being with manners comes before Torah. Derech eretz kadma leTorah. Rav Wolbe of blessed memory, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, in his great book Alei Shur, he writes how he's seen people that want to kiss the Torah when they lift up the Torah to bring it back or to bring it to the middle of the room. How people run over one another in order to kiss the Torah, in order to observe a commandment, or it's not really a commandment, but something that, I mean, it's good to kiss the Torah, to show respect and love. That's true. But you're willing to trample 30 people on your way. I've been there. Can't say I've done that, but I've been there. Most of us know what I'm talking about. That's what Rav Wolbe says. So it's time to stop the shoving culture, the pushing culture. And unfortunately, in Meron, unfortunately, I'm not going to go into it. I've had family members. The shoving culture exists alive and well. Wake up call number 5. This one really hit me. For 32 days, 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva passed away. If you do the math, 24,000 divided by 32 days, that comes up to 750. I was listening 2 days ago to an event that was sponsored for, I forgot exactly, an event outside of Israel, that was sponsored to address the tragedy of Meron, terrible tragedy Meron. And folks, one of the rabbis that got up says, dear friends, do you know how many people are today sitting Shiv'ah? This is the Jewish mourning for 7 days, mourning period. You know how many family members are sitting for these 45 people? He got up and said 750. When he said those words, I said, OMG. Oh my God. The same number. In the times of Rabbi Akiva, almost 2,000 years ago, 750 died a day. There are 700. What did they die of? Lack of love or hatred, depending on the Talmud's words or the Arizal words. And now, in our times, when we suffer from the same illness, the same AIDS, the Jewish AIDS, inner hatred, bickering, fighting. 750 people are sitting, relatives are sitting Shiva, the same number, for the Meron 45. Wake up call number 6 and last, and we'll call it a day. Hatred, big time. Many claim, many are pointing a finger at the police. Can very well be. Police are responsible, or somewhat responsible, some degree responsible for what happened. But our wake-up call number 6 is called hatred big time. Unfortunately, there is too much needless hatred, which I will mention now. When we point our fingers at the police, there's a good reason pointing fingers at the police. I've been a victim of police violence. I've had my sidelocks pulled on purpose by the police. I am no lover of police. However, there are many policemen. Not all have the same blemish. And many of them do a lot of good things for the Jewish people. So I must remember that also. I must have everything kept in proportion. Don't get to the hatred. Folks, unfortunately, in the religious community, some in the religious community, once again, we're never generalizing, God forbid, talking about a certain amount. There is a hatred of police, of authority, army, police, people that sacrifice a lot for the Jewish people. Sacrifice their time, their life, their nights. Put themselves on the line for us. And there is a hatred, perhaps from birth for some of us religious people, against the police. And many times when the police come and they ask the religious people to do something, to move, many times it's 100% legitimate. But we have so much hatred that we can't even listen and obey a legitimate request. Many times we create our own enemies by our actions, which were unnecessary. I'm not talking about when they're necessary. Stand up and fight. That's okay. That's all right. But so many times it's unnecessary. The police are correct, and we ignore them, and we badmouth them. That has to be stopped. And on the other foot, no Jew will be left behind here. The foot of the police. I've seen the police firsthand. I've experienced it myself. I've seen them in religious communities. I've seen what they've done. There are many anti-Semites within the police forces. Yes, there are. They would never do what they do to the seculars. That hatred must stop. There are people in Israel, celebrities, reporters. These people are anti-Semites, Hebrew-speaking anti-Semites. The worst of the worst. I'm not going to get into them. Celebrities who incite against the religious communities, the Haredi communities. Disgusting. How much incitement against the religious communities? Uncalled for. These people, these celebrities, these reporters, may their names be erased. Enemies of the Jewish people, enemies of the Torah, enemies of the land of Israel. They must be put in their place. There must be a demand by the population in Israel to have them step down from their positions. How much hatred is there for the state of Israel? Unfortunately, it's like the milk of some religious people since they were born. A hate. State does many good things, does many bad things that should be fought. But it does many good things. But there's a hatred of anything to do with the state. This must stop. Because hatred equals suffocation, equals 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, equals the 45 holy souls of Meron. And now, as if Meron was years ago, now under fire, under attack all over the land of Israel, all over the world. It's time, at least amongst us, the religious. I can't talk right now about the secular, but at least amongst us, each of us, if we don't have hatred, improve our love, improve our giving to others, neighbors, friends, people on the street, a little bit, change ourselves. If we have hatred, get rid of it. Respect, understand that there's something to learn from each of these groups. There's disputes, there's different ways, different strokes for different folks, true. Still, there's no need for the level that we have sunk. The hatred, the bickering, the fighting. I bless myself, I bless all of us. Let's wake up.